The 2024 Reese Senior Bowl had the most talent this All-Star game has had in years. Who stole the show last week in Mobile, Alabama? All that and more coming your way on this Thursday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, Eagles fans. I'm Louis DiBiase, host of the Locked On Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. You can find my work also over at Bleacher Report on today's edition of Locked On Eagles. The Eagles should be very interested in prospects that participated in this year's Senior Bowl at many positions of need on both sides of the ball. Damian Parson of Locked On NFL Draft and the Draft Network, he's going to help me dive into specific prospects that should be on Howie Roseman's radar after having a big week in Alabama. Today's episode of Locked On Eagles is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use our code in all lowercase LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. I got back from Alabama a few days ago, and again, compared to the last few years, and the Senior Bowl has churned out some pretty good talent on both sides of the ball over the last few seasons. But last year, too, because the Super Bowl was going on, it was Eagles-Chiefs at the time, and it didn't look like the Eagles had a whole lot of needs. Like, there wasn't a lot of focus on the All-Star game compared to this year where Howie Roseman has his work cut out for him on both sides of the football. And when you look at just on paper, because, again, last year, it actually was a pretty solid class. Like, look at wide receiver. I mean, Tank Dell came out of the Senior Bowl, and Puka Nacua. It was pretty strong there. Even there was Michael Wilson in the second round from the Arizona Cardinals I like a lot. So that was just at wide receiver alone, churning out some pretty good studs. But this year on paper, and then to see them show out in practice, like, this class was loaded on both sides of the ball, especially in the trenches, tackles on the offensive line, defensive linemen as well, cornerback, wide receiver. There's a lot to take away from the All-Star game, and Gino and I covered it a little bit last week, but I want to dive deeper into the Senior Bowl from a different perspective, get some winners from Damian Parson of our Locked On NFL Draft podcast. He's also a national scout over at the Draft Network. Want to see who he thought stole the show in Alabama. So let's get into the interview now, right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. All right, Eagles fans, welcome back into this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, joined now by the host of the Locked On NFL Draft podcast, also national scout over at the Draft Network, doing some awesome work for the draft down at the Senior Bowl in Mobile, Alabama. It's Damian Parson here to recap the Senior Bowl with me. Damian, thanks so much for joining us. I know you're a busy man.
Oh, no problem. I have no problem coming to talk to, Fly Eagles Nation, man, so I have no problem with it at all.
Yeah. So this year compared to last year, Damian, the Eagles have a lot more holes on paper, I think, on both sides of the football, especially on defense. So I definitely want to get into some defensive prospects with you. But what did you think of the overall crop of prospects down in Mobile this year compared to maybe the last few years?
Oh, I think this was probably one of their more stacked, one of the more loaded rosters, just top to bottom, offense and defense. Of course, the quarterback play compared to the last 2 years, just much better. When you're talking about Spencer Rattler, Michael Penix, Bo Nix, those guys, Joe Milton, even just the physical talent that he is, even though he needs some polish as a passer, just the unbridled talent was much better. The trench was, especially on both sides of the ball, especially offensive tackle, was great. And then we still had some guys that pulled out late, like Troy Fautanu from Washington and, Byron Murphy the second, the interior D lineman from Texas. There was still a couple big name guys that the last minute said, hey, man, we're going to go ahead and not show up, or, whether it was like a nagging injury, they wanted to make sure that they were healed up for the combine, or they just got a call from their agent and say, you know what, let's just call it hold off until Indianapolis. Yeah. But I think roster-wise, this has probably been the best roster of the last, 3, maybe 4 to 5 years.
Sure. And Damian, the Eagles need a lot of help at, you look at defense, the second and third level, cornerback, linebacker, safety, but we also know general manager Howie Roseman, 99% of the time with those top picks in the first 2 rounds, he goes with the trenches. And I feel like, as you mentioned, with the offensive tackle group, the defensive line as well, it felt like that was kind of the strength of the group down there. And is it maybe the strength of the entire draft class again?
Yeah, offensive tackle especially, right? So
Yeah.
I think the two deepest positions in this class are offensive tackle and then a wide receiver. But the interior D
I agree.
line is probably that very next group where you look at guys that, from a Rook Ororo from Clemson, Byron Murphy, who I mentioned earlier, Tavondre Sweat, who was down in Mobile, the big 6'4", 360-pound defensive tackles, Jerzon Newton from Illinois. Like this interior Tyler Davis from the other interior defensive lineman from Clemson, he was also down there. So this interior defensive line group is outstanding. It's a lot more. I think I would say like the 6'1" ish, 6'2" ish, 305, 300-pound guys that are more three techs that's going to like really rush the passer. But like you can definitely put them alongside another bigger nose tackle and let those guys help in the run game. But I think like if a team needs to like beef up their front, this is a good class to do so.
No, I totally agree. Regardless of position, though, at the Senior Bowl, was there maybe one prospect, and there were a lot of guys I thought that shined, but was there a guy specifically that stood out to you more than anybody else throughout the week, especially at practice?
Oh, man, got to be cornerback from Toledo, Quinyon Mitchell.
I thought you were going to say him. I agree.
I sat down and interviewed this young man, intelligent, competitive, right? He came in like I think that's something he told me in the interview. Like I came in with a chip on my shoulder because playing at Toledo, first thing people are gonna say, well, small school, poor competition. But if you go back to 2022, he played against Marvin Harrison Jr. He covered him 1-on-1, right? So it's like that's the creme de la creme at the wide receiver position, in all of college football. So this young man came out with a point to prove. He talked about it, man. We play a lot of cover 4. I was excited to have the chance to line up 1-on-1, man-to-man, and line up at the line of scrimmage and press man and really showcase my ability. And he did that well. You talking about battling at the catch point. He has arguably the best ball skills of the corners in this class.
Mm-hmm.
A guy that's really quick twitch. His click and close is outstanding. So it's like, he almost had a pick. I think it was in teams on maybe day one where he's kind of like playing off. And then he like flips his hips and drives on the outbreaking route, and it was like just a game of inches that it wasn't in his hands. And I was like, man, I was about to go back for 6. So like he's one of those guys that he gives you that scheme versatility, that coverage versatility, where it's like, you know what, you can play cover 4, you can play cover 2, you can play man to man, you can play off man, you can play all the cover 3 if you like. You can run different things with him in your defense, and that's what's so appealing about this young man's talent and skill set. And I believe he's probably going to hit sub 4.4s. Don't quote me on it, but that's kind of where the talk has been. Around Quinyon Mitchell come Indianapolis.
Eagles fans are going to be excited to hear about that. He's the favorite right now for mock drafts you see all across draft Twitter. So, and Eagles, they desperately need cornerback help this year. Darius Slay, maybe in his last year. I don't know if James Bradbury will be back. So Quinyon Mitchell is also a playmaker, and the Eagles did not last year, after losing Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, did not have a nose for turnovers in the secondary. Does Mitchell remind you of anybody? I mean, I think, as you mentioned, he kind of answered some questions with playing more press man throughout the week in Mobile, but also a great zone corner with, as you mentioned, maybe the best ball skills of the class. Like, does he give you vibes of anybody in the NFL already?
Yeah, the duo down over in Cleveland. The thing about Greg Newsome Jr. and Denzel Ward.
Yeah,
he reminds me. I think he's built similar to Greg Newsome, who I think Greg is a little bigger than Denzel, if I remember correctly, in terms of height, weight, and everything. But the athleticism of similar to Denzel, where Denzel was the better athlete of the two. So you're talking about being able to mirror match guys, flip, turn, transition so quickly and smoothly. And just a guy that I'm telling you now, this is a young man that's going to continue to evolve his game. You know what I mean? And what I loved about him, and I talked with, Wiggs on Locked On Jags about this. Like, this young man talked to me about, like, listen, I'm going to test the waters against bigger guys. I got to figure out when I'm lined up in press, I'm going to figure it out. He's like, yeah, if they're too strong and they're too physical, I know that I got to step back and change my approach and not meet them in the contact window, where you see some guys, they're just super physical. And it's like, man, playing against a 6'4", 220-pound wide receiver, or even playing against a Jamar Chase who thrives off of physicality. No, you gotta back off, play some soft press, soft shoe, make these guys dictate pace. You make them get into their stem so you can get into their hip pocket quicker, rather than trying to wrestle with them at the line of scrimmage, because then they toss you and now they're going vertical, and that's a 60-yard touchdown
For sure.
that you didn't want to give up. So I love like kind of listening to him kind of talk about his process and how different it is compared to the skill set the receiver he's facing. I think this is going to be an outstanding pro cornerback.
Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventures could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to that next level. They got the 2024 Nissan Rogue. It's perfect for city drives and great escapes. Class exclusive Google built-ins is your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. Gone are the days of connecting your phone. Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store are built right into your 12-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. The 2024 Rogue is the perfect mid-size crossover for your next adventure. Nissan's incredible lineup also includes the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder that has room for up to 8 people, an expansive cargo capacity, and advanced available 4x4 capability. With 284 horsepower and up to 6,000 pounds towing, when adventure calls, the Pathfinder is there to answer. Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop nissanusa.com today. We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Guys, want to let you know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now you can also find it on Amazon Fire TV. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. So find the Locked On Sports Today channel now on Amazon Fire TV. Yeah, that's awesome to hear. Were there any other cornerbacks that made some money this week, do you think? Because Mitchell was definitely the standout. I think everybody knows that. But anybody else that looked good in the secondary at corner especially?
Oh, yeah. A guy that, like, he doesn't get a lot of talk in this class right now, but there's two. First of all, Jarvis Brownlee from Louisville, transfer from Florida State heading into this season. And, man, I remember watching this tape at Florida State last year, and I was like, he should probably come out. Like, this kid's good. You know what I mean? He goes back to school. He transfers to Louisville, has a good season. Then he comes on to Mobile, and you're talking about physicality, ball skills, route recognition, knows how to read, especially in zone. In the game Saturday, I was on the sideline watching, and he picked off Sam Hartman, where he just kind of dropped off into zone, read his spot, saw the receiver in his area, and I don't think he expected Sam to throw the ball to him, but Sam let it go, so he went and got it, right? But he battled with Xavier Leggett, the 6'1", 225-pound receiver out of South Carolina. Those two had some really nice battles. He battled with the bigger receivers. He battled with the smaller guys. And, like, the ball skills are there. I think he won Defensive Player of the Week for his team. Voted by the offense and everything. Like, he had an outstanding week, and I think he made himself some money. And the guy from Kentucky, man, Andrew Phillips, guy that to me, I think his best ball is going into the NFL. Where now, you know, being down in Mobile, I was able to see him, and that was one of my questions. They didn't play him a lot in press, so it was a lot, you know, off, a lot of zone stuff like that. But yeah, he had reps against Johnny Wilson. This kid's like 5'11", Johnny Wilson 6'7". Yeah. You're talking about being in the hip pocket, timing your jump, being physical, turning and locating the football in man-to-man coverage. I think this kid has, like, and he's willing to step in and be a participant in run support. I absolutely love what he did this week. I think, you know, they threw a couple flags on him because, like, he was a little handsy, quote unquote. I think it was ticky-tack. But either way, like, I think this is a young man who had a good week. And I think, you know, he's supposed to be in Indianapolis. I think the combine is going to be big for him, because if he goes out there and does his thing, his name will really start to shine amongst the draft community.
Damian, you mentioned a guy by name, and I always get interested in these prospects that are, you know, 6'5" plus and have this crazy wingspan at positions that maybe you're not used to that. And you mentioned Johnny Wilson of Florida State. Another guy I noticed down there was James Williams, the safety from Miami, played a lot of linebacker. Like, what do you think about those prospects, how they project to the next level? Like, how do you use them, especially Wilson? Because I was watching him in practice too at receiver, and I'm like, is he more of a tight end? Can he separate at the next level? But there are some traits that if those guys hit, they have physical abilities that not everybody has, and just the upside looks incredible.
Yeah, with Johnny Wilson, man, like, you know, I think the first day, I think a lot of the guys were kind of, I talked to a lot of them, they was like, man, just trying to knock that rust off, man. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. Just that first time competing in a while. And like day two, Johnny Wilson to me really took a step. And like, they put him up against Javon Bullard, who's like a 5'10" safety from Georgia and a quick twitch kind of guy. Line up one-on-one, and Johnny beat him at the line of scrimmage. Quick-footed. He beat Jalen Simpson, who's a twitchy athlete, corner safety hybrid from Auburn. And so for me, it's like I think he can absolutely play wide receiver. And I tweeted out yesterday, I'm playing him everywhere, right? You think about going to some empty sets and not putting a tight end on the field. I'm putting him in that tight end alignment, close to the line of scrimmage. He's like number 3 from the sideline. He's a guy close to the actual to the tackle, whether it's right or left. Because I want a safety to walk down, or I want a linebacker to walk down in those situations, right? Because the game in the NFL is all about creating mismatches. So I want him to be that mismatch option where, I can play him outside. I can play him in the slot. I can play him reduced down closer to the line, to the actual formation, to the offensive line. And I think that you can get the best out of him. 6'7", legit 6'6", 6'7". His arm length is outstanding. Like, just to watch him, I remember taking a picture of him just kind of warming up. He was just standing there, and I'm pretty sure he could touch his knees just from standing. Like, his arm talent, his arm length is crazy. And then, just kind of looking at what he brings. And James Williams is going to be an interesting case. I felt like the Senior Bowl wasn't the best opportunity because he was transitioning to that linebacker role for the first time. So, like, watching him kind of have to deal with the running backs and one-on-ones and, stuff like that and those passing reps were a little difficult for him. But I think there's a lot there. He's a heavy hitter. He's physical. He wants to play downhill. And I think if you can, like, really take your time with him once you get him on your team, make sure that you get his keys and everything else, like get him diagnosing quickly and reading, I think you could have yourself a really good linebacker because he's big, he's strong, and he's athletic. So I think the coverage ability is there, because when you think about being 6'4", 6'5", and him as a spot dropper in the middle of the field, middle hook zone, you're trying to float passes over the top. Good luck, because that's a big body sitting over there in the middle of the field that you're going to really have to put it kind of high arcing over the top, and that takes some steam off of the pass, which allows safeties to crash down. And it's just not the best situation for a quarterback or a wide receiver. So I think he's somebody that, you definitely want to get in, and he's a good developmental piece for a defense.
Yeah, coaches got to be willing to be open-minded with those kind of guys, right? Matchup-based players that you want to develop and not pigeonhole them early on, right? So I totally agree with that. Only other question for you, because the Eagles at running back, they've got some questions. DeAndre Swift is an unrestricted free agent. I think they need to bolster up that committee, even if he is back. And we know Howie Roseman does not normally sign running backs to multi-year extensions. He loves to go value with this. So I'm sure he'll bring in another free agent, even if it's not Swift or a trade. But he hasn't drafted a running back since Kenneth Gainwell back in 2021. Were there any guys down in Mobile, maybe a day 2 or day 3 pick, more realistic for Howie compared to other teams that, because every year you see a day 2 or day 3 guy become a stud at the next level, almost instantaneous. Was there a couple guys there you thought could be prospects for that type of value next year?
Yeah, I think, Ray Davis from Kentucky, 5'8", 220, catch the ball out of the backfield.
Looks like he caught everything. Yeah.
Yeah, he does pretty much everything. Pass protects, all of it. Strong, physical downhill runner. But has good footwork. A guy that no one's talking about a lot, but he's one of my guys. He's a Dame's dude, man. And that's South Dakota State's Isaiah Davis at 6 foot, 6'1", 220. Everybody talks about Braylon Allen, and that's fine being 6'2", 245. He's 19 over from Wisconsin and everything, former linebacker. But, man, when I look at Isaiah Davis, I think putting him in the offense, when you think about having him back there with Jalen Hurts, where that backside end is not going to crash down.
Yeah.
This is a downhill guy, but he has quick, efficient footwork to find alternative routes, right? If you close the door, if it's inside zone, you close that A gap, he can jump cut and slide cut to the B gap. He can do those type of things. And actually, he has quicker feet, and he's much more twitchy, in my opinion, than a Braylon Allen in terms of tight, short area quickness and ability to handle quick penetration, right? Negotiate pressure. And I think he can do that well. I think it's Kamani Vidal, who from Troy, another 5'8", 5'9", kind of muscular build young man. But you think about Blake Corum, right? And I remember talking to my co-host Keith Sanchez and talking to a scout on the sideline. I was like, and the question we were asked, like, what does Blake Corum do that Vidal doesn't? And it was like, that's a fair point, where you can get Vidal 5th round instead of drafting Blake Corum in the 3rd and still have the same type of build, same type of speed, same type of receiving ability, right? So I think that this is a young man that played well. and did some good things, man. So those are some of the backs, that really shine. I think Dylan Laub from New Hampshire, talking about the guy that arguably could play slot receiver, like his route running ability. He's not Christian McCaffrey. I want people to not try and do that to this young man. He's more Danny Woodhead, but like I absolutely love what I saw from him down in Mobile last week.
Absolutely. Damian Parson joining me right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, host of the Locked On NFL Draft podcast, national scout also over at the Draft Network. Could listen to you talk ball all day, man. Love having you on the show, and hopefully we can do it again soon before the draft.
Absolutely, bro.
Thanks, bro. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood is the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar that you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on that 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started now at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal information, claim as of Q1 2024 validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC member SIPC is a registered broker-dealer. All right, thanks so much to Damian Parson for joining us right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Amazing work he does over at our Locked On NFL Draft podcast and at the Draft Network. Again, the Senior Bowl, I was down there as well in Mobile. It was a loaded class on both sides of the ball. It's another good year to have multiple day 1 and day 2 picks like Howie Roseman does. He has a first-round pick at 22nd overall. He has the 50th pick in round 2, the 53rd overall selection. He also does have a third-round pick. 4 picks in the top 3 rounds. I would guarantee at least 1 or 2 of those guys are from the Senior Bowl. And these events, they really are important. You can get a lot out of these all-star events, not just the Senior Bowl, but the East-West Shrine Game, where, you look at like Zay Flowers came out of the Shrine Game last year, and even the CGS All-Star Game in Dallas. Gino helps run that event. Those are all huge for coaches and scouts, front office members alike to get in the nitty-gritty, get up close and personal with these prospects, get to see how they work mentally, physically, with mechanics, traits, footwork, specific drills you can put them through, 1-on-1s, 11-on-11s, 4s, like really see how they work. You can interview them as well. It's super important. The same goes for the NFL Scouting Combine, which is, a few weeks away? So these are huge, important parts of the evaluation process for the NFL Draft. But what I will say as well is don't put 100% of your opinion on these prospects into the Senior Bowl, into the Combine, into Pro Days as well, which I didn't even mention. They're just one small piece of the entire evaluation puzzle. Like, they're very important pieces of the puzzle. But remember, the tape tells all. Like, the tape is the most important part. Teams have gotten burned all the time. I feel like on a yearly basis when they look too much into the Senior Bowl, if somebody struggled or they completely shined, or a 40-yard dash for the Combine, or somebody had a bad pro day or a really good pro day. The circus that was, I don't know why this is the first one I thought of, but Johnny Manziel back in 2014 wearing a helmet and shoulder pads, playing music during his pro day, like the hype bought the Cleveland Browns in. I'm sure they were in already before, but you got to be really careful with these events. You don't want to put all your stock into it. For me, I should say that it should be something that raises questions that you didn't see on tape, that you saw at the pro days, at the Combine, at the Senior Bowl. It should raise questions, then you then go back to the tape to confirm, or the tape doesn't show that and you're saying, okay, it might have just been this week, it might have just been a bad 40, like he plays faster on tape, or so-and-so does this over this because it's an in-game situation. That is what these events should be used for, to help raise questions that you can then confirm or deny through tape, or you might have seen things already on tape that you know about these players and you want to go confirm that through the Senior Bowl. Like, you can say, all right, I think this guy is a 4-6 type of player. He's probably a slot-dependent receiver, and then boom, suddenly in the 40-yard dash, He runs a sub 4.4, and you're like, okay, maybe he is faster than I thought. So, but you might say, okay, this guy, this is what I saw from him on tape. He struggles with this. He plays he over pursues too much at the line of scrimmage. And then the Senior Bowl could show that. It can kind of confirm that, okay, this is one of his, weaknesses that he needs to work on. And this is why I would grade him as a day 2 pick. So again, the Senior Bowl, very important. The draft, of course, with the pro days, the combine, every event for the draft is very important, but do take it with a grain of salt. A lot of guys, I will say though, too, why it's important. Smaller school players can put themselves on the map. Like 2 years ago, when I was at the Senior Bowl, me personally, I had no idea who Tariq Woolen was. He's a cornerback from UTSA. He only played corner for a single year after switching positions from playing receiver, and boom, suddenly he's at the Senior Bowl, and I'm sure, again, a lot of scouts knew about Tariq Woolen, but you can imagine some general managers are like, and this is what I said to myself, who's the 6'3" corner over there? Who's this giant covering wide receivers, and why is he not playing edge rusher? Why is he not playing linebacker? Why is he not playing receiver? And then suddenly Tariq Woolen runs a 4.3, and then you go back to his tape, you're like, whoa, this guy really is a playmaker, even at that level of college play. And boom, Tariq Woolen is a Rookie of the Year finalist in 2022. So it can also help, small school guys a lot. Not that, small school guys are hidden anymore. If you're a good football player, the NFL is going to find you. I mean, look at the Eagles with how many times they've gone to the Dakotas for prospects, right? Or, you look at Jeremy Chin and Kyle Duggar the one year out of Rice and, the not Division II, but FCS schools. I mean, it happens every single year, but these national platforms do help those small school guys as well compete with the best of the best. Because one thing about a Tariq Woolen at UTSA, it's not very often that he's going to be covering guys from Alabama or LSU, top receivers from the Big Ten. It's not every day an edge rusher from North Dakota State's going to have to go up against a left tackle from Oklahoma. So that's another reason it's important. It's very important. It's a huge part of the process, but again, it shouldn't be the end-all, be-all. Don't take the Combine, Senior Bowls, Pro Day as gospel. Use it as a nice element to go back to the tape. Again, the tape tells all for the NFL draft, and so many teams fall for that every single year. But shout out to Damian Parson again for joining us today. So many good prospects at the Senior Bowl that, to me, confirmed a lot of what I already knew, or some guys went on my radar and raised some questions. I'm like, this guy's legit. Let me go back to the tape. Let me check out TCU receiver Jaquan Jackson, or he mentioned Isaiah Davis from South Dakota. Like, this guy's got some power. Could he be your new RB2 in this committee, and you get a new fast running back and Isaiah Davis is your power? Like, that could be something the Eagles consider. So the Senior Bowl is very important, and Parson did a great job of lining up all the prospects that won that week, especially Quinyon Mitchell. Eagles fans, I think after this show, they already were excited about Quinyon Mitchell. They're going to be even more excited now. All right, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Shout out to our everydayers for making us your first listen each and every day. We'll be back tomorrow. Gino joins me again for one more show this week. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen every day. I'm Louis DiBiase signing off. As always, thank you so much for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds.